When I opened my eyes, the first thing I felt was warmth. Not the gentle warmth of morning sunlight, but the heavy, relentless heat pressing against my skin. For a long moment, I didn't move. I listened. There were no voices. No birds. No footsteps. Only the endless whisper of wind moving across the sand. I tried to remember my name. Nothing. I searched for the faces of people I once knew. Nothing. Even the place I once called home had vanished from my memory. It was as if my entire life had been erased overnight. I slowly pushed myself to my feet. Before me stretched an ocean of golden sand. Without beginning. Without end. I had no idea where I was. But somehow, it felt as though this place had been waiting for me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. The wind never stopped. It flowed across the dunes like invisible waves upon a silent sea. There was no scent of life. No smoke rising into the sky. No birds circling overhead. Not even the smallest insect dared disturb the silence. For the first time, I understood what true loneliness sounded like. It was not a sound at all. It was the absence of everything. I turned slowly, hoping to find something behind me. A tree. A river. A path. Anything. There was nothing. Only the desert. Stretching farther than my eyes could follow. Somewhere deep inside me, fear began to grow. Not because I believed I would die here, but because I no longer knew who I had been before arriving here. As I searched the empty horizon, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was another illusion created by the heat. The air itself seemed to bend beneath the burning sun. But the shape remained. A single triangle. Far beyond the endless dunes. Too perfect to be a mountain. Too distant to be certain. I rubbed the sand from my eyes. It was still there. Waiting. Watching. Calling me without a single word. I had no map. No memory. No destination. Yet, for reasons I could not explain, my feet began to move toward it. Perhaps every journey begins with a single unanswered question. And mine had just appeared on the horizon. I stood there for a long time. Waiting. For a sign. For a voice. For someone to tell me where I was. Nothing came. The wind offered no answers. The endless desert remained silent. At that moment, I realized something. If I stayed where I was, I would learn nothing. Whatever waited beyond the horizon, I would have to find it myself. I took a single step. Then another. The soft sand shifted beneath my boots. Each footprint became the first proof that I was still alive. Without knowing why, I began walking toward the distant triangle. Time no longer had meaning. The sun climbed higher. The heat became almost unbearable. Every dune looked exactly like the one before it. The horizon never seemed to grow closer. Sometimes, I wondered if I was walking in circles. The distant triangle remained exactly where it had always been. Neither closer, nor farther away. The desert seemed determined to test every step I took. Yet strangely, I no longer wanted to turn back. Because there was nothing behind me. Only questions. Then, for the first time, the desert changed. Something lay half buried beneath the sand. Not a rock. Not another illusion. A broken clay jar. Its surface was worn smooth by countless years beneath the wind. Nearby, I found something else. A piece of weathered cloth. Almost completely buried. Someone had been here before me. Perhaps many years ago. Perhaps only yesterday. For the first time since I opened my eyes, hope quietly returned. I was not completely alone. Just as I began to believe that the desert belonged to no one, I saw movement. At first, it was nothing more than a few dark shapes dancing through the heat. I stopped walking. The figures slowly became clearer. Camels. People. A caravan. The first living souls I had seen since opening my eyes. For a moment, I wondered if they were only another mirage. But then, one of them raised an arm. He had seen me too. The distance between us grew smaller with every step. My heart beat faster. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally knew. I was no longer alone. The caravan continued across the desert without looking back. From the top of the dune, the traveler watched them grow smaller with every passing moment. Behind him, there was nothing. Only endless waves of sand stretching toward every horizon. No shelter. No road. No sign that anyone had ever lived here. For a long moment, he remained perfectly still. If he stayed, the desert would eventually take everything from him. The wind would erase his footprints. The sun would drain the last drop of strength from his body. And this silent world would continue as if he had never existed. His eyes returned to the fading caravan. They were strangers. He did not know where they were going. He did not even know if they would welcome him. But they were alive. And right now, life was the only direction worth following. The traveler tightened the strap of his satchel. He drew one slow breath. Then, he stepped down from the dune. Not because he trusted the people ahead, but because standing still was no longer an option. Sometimes, the first step into the unknown is the only way to survive. The distance between the traveler and the caravan slowly grew shorter. No one called him. No one told him to leave. Yet every pair of eyes seemed to know he was there. The people at the back of the caravan glanced over their shoulders. Some whispered quietly. Others simply watched. Their hands tightened around walking staffs and ropes. They did not understand who this silent stranger was. Neither did he. The traveler kept his distance. He lowered his gaze and followed the same trail of footprints without a word. Trust was not something given freely in a land like this. It had to be earned. For a while, the only sound between them was the wind moving across the dunes, and the slow footsteps of strangers sharing the same road. We walked for what felt like hours. No one spoke. No one questioned why I was there. After a while, I stopped expecting them to. The only sounds were footsteps, the soft wind, and the quiet creak of leather and wood from the pack animals ahead. Then, something changed. At first, I couldn't explain it. The dunes no longer looked endless. The wind no longer stung my face. Here and there, small patches of dry grass pushed through the sand. Tiny signs of life. So easy to miss, yet impossible to ignore once you noticed them. Birds appeared high above us. They weren't wandering. They were flying towards something. The people in the caravan never looked surprised. They walked with quiet certainty, as if every step had already been walked 1,000 times before. I simply followed. And for the first time since waking in this endless sea of sand, I no longer felt like I was walking toward death. I felt like I was walking toward a world. The caravan never stopped. They simply kept walking, as if they already knew what waited beyond the next ridge. I climbed after them, one slow step at a time. The sand shifted beneath every footstep. My legs had grown heavy. Every breath felt warmer than the last. Then, I reached the top. And everything changed. Beyond the dunes, a ribbon of deep blue water stretched across the land. Palm trees lined its banks. Birds drifted above the reeds. Small boats floated silently along the current. Smoke rose gently from distant homes. Green fields spread farther than I could see. After endless sand, it almost looked impossible. Yet everyone in the caravan simply kept walking. To them, this was home. To me, it was the first proof that this world was real. I had crossed a desert and arrived at the river that gave life to an entire civilization. We followed the caravan down into the valley. With every step, the desert slipped farther behind us. I looked back only once. The endless dunes that had nearly claimed my life now seemed strangely quiet. They no longer felt like a prison. They felt like a memory. Ahead of me, the earth began to change. The loose sand beneath my feet slowly gave way to firm ground. Patches of green pushed through the soil. I noticed footprints. Hundreds of them. Men. Women. Children. Donkeys. Oxen. Wheels carved into the earth by carts that had passed this way long before us. For the first time since opening my eyes in that endless sea of sand, I realized I was no longer walking through wilderness. I was walking through a land that people called home. Even the air felt different. The dry wind had disappeared. In its place came the scent of damp earth, fresh reeds, and growing things. Birds circled overhead. Insects hummed quietly among the grasses. Somewhere nearby, water flowed. I could hear it before I saw it. Then, the caravan reached the river. No one stopped. They had crossed this path countless times before. But I couldn't simply walk past it. I knelt beside the water. Slowly, I reached out my hand. The current slipped between my fingers. Cool. Clear. Alive. After everything the desert had taken from me, that single touch felt like a promise. A man near the front of the caravan turned and quietly waited. He didn't call my name. He didn't need to. I stood, took one last look at the river, and followed them once again. This time, I no longer felt like a stranger wandering through a forgotten world. I felt like a traveler taking his first true step into Egypt. We continued walking beside the river. No one seemed to be in a hurry. The Nile moved with a quiet confidence, as if it had been flowing this way forever. Every few steps, another piece of life revealed itself. Women knelt at the riverbank, washing linen beneath the morning sun. Children laughed as they chased one another through the shallow water. Fishermen untangled their nets before pushing narrow wooden boats into the current. A farmer guided 2 oxen across a nearby field. Another carried baskets filled with fresh vegetables toward the village. Nobody stared at me for long. They looked, wondered, then quietly returned to their work. Life here did not stop for strangers. It simply continued. I began to understand something. The greatness of Egypt did not begin with kings, or temples, or monuments carved from stone. It began here, along the river, in the ordinary lives of ordinary people. For the first time, I wasn't searching for answers. I was simply watching. We walked for hours toward the city. With every step, its walls grew larger. What had seemed like a distant shape on the horizon now towered above the valley. The closer we came, the smaller I felt. Massive stone walls stretched across the land like a mountain built by human hands. Great wooden gates stood open beneath towering watchtowers. Guards watched every traveler who approached. Scribes sat beneath shaded shelters, recording names, counting goods, and marking deliveries onto rolls of papyrus. Merchants waited patiently beside wagons overflowing with grain, pottery, timber, and livestock. Dust hung in the warm air. Animals called out. Wheels groaned beneath heavy loads. Hundreds of voices blended into one endless sound. I had never seen so many people gathered in one place. This was more than a city. It was the heartbeat of an entire kingdom. The caravan slowed to a halt. One by one, we joined the line before the gate. I looked beyond the entrance. I could only catch glimpses. A rooftop. A column. A fluttering banner. A world hidden just beyond the walls. Then, the line moved forward. I took one more step, and crossed beneath the gate. The moment I emerged from its shadow, everything changed. The quiet valley disappeared behind me. Before me stretched a city unlike anything I had ever imagined. A broad avenue reached toward the heart of the city, alive with an endless stream of people. Merchants called to passing customers. Laborers pushed heavy carts through the crowd. Priests in white linen walked calmly toward distant temples. Children darted between market stalls, laughing as though the city itself belonged to them. Smoke drifted above rows of sandstone buildings. Fresh bread baked in clay ovens. Bronze echoed beneath the hands of skilled craftsmen. Everywhere I looked, something was being built. Something was being traded. Something was being created. This was not simply a place where people lived. It was a place where an entire civilization breathed. I stood still for only a moment, trying to take it all in. Then I realized. This city held far more stories than any traveler could ever hear. I had barely begun to understand the rhythm of the city, when everything suddenly changed. One by one, merchants stepped away from the center of the street. Farmers lowered the baskets they carried. Conversations faded into whispers. No one gave an order. Yet everyone seemed to know exactly what to do. A path slowly opened through the crowded avenue. Then I heard it. A slow, steady beat. Deep drums echoed between the stone buildings. The sound grew closer with every heartbeat. Wisps of fragrant incense drifted through the warm air. White-robed priests appeared first. They walked slowly, their heads lowered. Their hands held smoking censers and sacred staffs. Behind them came attendants carrying offerings of bread, fruit, flowers, and jars of wine. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the busiest city had fallen silent. I did not yet know which god they served. But I understood one thing. Here, faith walked beside every citizen. The procession came to a gentle halt. For a brief moment, no one moved. I lifted my eyes. And for the first time, I truly saw the temple. It rose above the city like a mountain carved by human hands. Massive walls stretched farther than I could follow. Towering gateways stood beneath the endless sky. Every surface seemed alive with carved figures. Kings, gods, and stories written in stone. The city I had walked through only moments before suddenly felt very small. This place belonged to something far older, far greater. The priest stepped forward without hesitation. The people lowered their heads once more. Some whispered quiet prayers. Others held their offerings close against their chests. No one hurried. No one spoke above a whisper. Crossing this threshold was not like entering another building. It felt like leaving the ordinary world behind. I hesitated. Not because anyone stopped me, but because every instinct told me I was about to enter somewhere sacred. I took one slow step. Then another. The sounds of the city faded behind me. The laughter. The merchants. The crowded streets. All disappeared. Only the gentle crackle of burning incense remained. The scent drifted through the warm air. Somewhere deeper inside the temple, voices began to rise. Not in conversation, but in prayer. Low. Steady. Almost like the temple itself was breathing. Sunlight poured through the enormous stone entrance, casting long beams across the floor. Dust floated through the golden light. Every footstep echoed softly against the ancient walls. People quietly placed bread, fruit, flowers, and jars of wine upon the stone altars. No one expected anything in return. They gave because they believed. Because here, the gods were not distant beings living beyond the sky. They were part of every harvest, every birth, every journey, every sunrise. Watching them, I began to understand something. One by one, the people stepped forward in silence. Bread, fruit, fresh flowers, and jars of wine were carefully placed upon the stone altars. No one expected anything in return. They offered these gifts because they believed. Here, the gods were never distant beings watching from beyond the heavens. They were present in every harvest, every child born, every journey begun, and every sunrise that greeted the land. As I stood quietly among them, I began to understand something I had never truly considered before. Egypt was not built only by its kings, nor only by those who carved its monuments from stone. It was built by faith. A faith so deeply rooted that even these towering temples were only the outward shape of the belief that had long lived within the hearts of its people. As I stepped farther into the temple, the noise of Memphis slowly disappeared behind me. The merchants, the children, the voices that had filled the streets only moments ago, all faded into silence. Not the silence of an abandoned place, but the silence of somewhere people believed the gods could hear every whisper. The air felt cooler here. Sunlight slipped through narrow openings high above, painting golden beams across the stone floor. Tiny particles of dust drifted through the light, moving so slowly that time itself seemed to have stopped. The deeper I walked, the larger the statues became. Some watched with the head of a falcon. Others carried the face of a jackal. There were gods crowned with horns. And others unlike anything I had ever imagined. At first, I wondered why a civilization would give its gods the faces of animals. But no one around me looked surprised. Children walked calmly beneath these towering figures. Old men lowered their heads in quiet respect. Women placed small offerings beside the statues before continuing on their way. To them, these were not strange creatures. They were protectors, guides, the invisible hands that watched over every part of life. As I continued through the hall, I noticed that every wall was covered with carvings. Kings presenting offerings, priests raising incense, boats sailing upon the Nile, fields filled with grain beneath the morning sun, stars crossing the night sky. Every stone seemed to tell another story. Not one of conquest, but of gratitude. It was as though the people had carved their faith into the walls so it would never be forgotten. While I stood there trying to understand what I was seeing, an elderly priest approached me. He did not ask where I had come from. Nor did he question why I was there. He simply smiled. Then he rested one hand upon a carved image of a falcon-headed god. "The gods are never far away," he said softly. "They are in the river T. They are in the river that feeds us. They are in the sun that wakes us. They are in every harvest. They are in every child born beneath this sky." His words were simple. Yet they carried a weight far greater than the stone surrounding us. For the first time since arriving in Egypt, I realized that these temples had never been built simply to honor statues. They had been built to remind every generation that life itself was sacred. As I turned to leave, I looked back one final time. The towering figures remained silent, unmoving, watching over the temple as they always had. Perhaps, to understand Egypt, I first had to understand the faith that had shaped its people. Only then could I truly begin to understand this extraordinary civilization. When I left the temple, I expected to return to the ordinary rhythm of the city. The streets were alive once again. Merchants called to passing travelers. Children laughed as they chased one another through the narrow alleys. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the warm afternoon air. For a brief moment, it felt as though nothing had changed. Yet the more I listened, the more I noticed a single word rising above every conversation. Pharaoh. An old merchant spoke the name with admiration. A young craftsman spoke it with pride. A mother whispered it to her curious child. Even the priests in the temple had spoken of him with quiet reverence. No matter where I walked, the same name followed me. Who was this man, whose presence could be felt even when he was nowhere to be seen? Before I could wonder any longer, the sound of drums echoed through the streets. The conversation stopped. The marketplace fell silent. One by one, people stepped aside. Some lowered their heads. Others knelt without hesitation. I turned toward the sound. A column of royal guards advanced slowly through the avenue. Their bronze weapons shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Their footsteps struck the stone in perfect rhythm. No one dared cross their path. The procession came closer. Then, to my surprise, it stopped. Not before a noble. Not before a priest. Before me. One of the royal officials stepped forward. His expression revealed nothing. For a long moment, he simply looked into my eyes. Then he spoke. His Majesty wishes to see you. Nothing more. No explanation. No reason. Before I could ask a single question, the royal guards turned toward the palace. And without fully understanding why, I found myself following them. The city slowly disappeared behind me. The noise of the marketplace faded with every step. Ahead stood walls unlike anything I had ever seen. They did not seem built merely to protect a king. They were built to remind every visitor how small they truly were. The royal guards walked without a single wasted movement. No one spoke. Only the sound of sandals against polished stone echoed beneath the towering gateways. As the great wooden gates opened, an entirely different world revealed itself. The air felt quieter, cooler. The scent of flowering trees drifted across still pools of water. Palm trees lined carefully planned gardens. Servants moved silently between courtyards. Officials carrying rolls of papyrus hurried through shaded corridors. Scribes bent over their work beneath painted colonnades. Every person seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Nothing appeared chaotic. Nothing appeared accidental. It was as if the palace itself breathed with perfect order. For the first time since arriving in Egypt, I no longer felt like a traveler. I felt like an outsider standing inside the heart of an empire. And somewhere beyond these endless halls, the pharaoh was waiting. At last, the royal escort stopped. Before us stood doors unlike any I had seen before. They rose toward the ceiling like the walls of a fortress. Without a word, the doors began to open. A flood of golden light spilled into the corridor. At the far end of the great hall, someone sat upon a throne. Too distant to see. Too still to understand. I could not see his face. Yet somehow, I knew. This was the man whose name echoed through every street in Egypt. Am I about to meet the most powerful man in the world? The sun was already sinking behind the horizon. And for the first time since I arrived, Egypt felt strangely quiet. I looked back one last time. At the temples. At the palace. At the river that had given life to an empire. Every stone, every face, every story had become part of my own journey. I reached into my satchel and took out the old journal that had traveled with me all this time. Its pages were worn. Its leather carried the marks of countless roads. I opened to a blank page. Slowly, I began to write. Chapter 1. Ancient Egypt. I came here searching for answers. But I leave with something greater. Not certainty, but understanding. I closed the journal, tied the leather strap, looked toward the road ahead. There are still countless civilizations waiting beyond the horizon. And tomorrow, another page will begin.